8 Sizes Too Big, written by Nick Glossop, illustrations by Phil Hawes. In my neighborhood and in yours, there lives a girl who is the littlest. In fact, on every block down every lane, there lives a littlest girl. Be she Sonia, Fatima, or Pam, she's as cute as a button and sweet like honey. And so it's only fair that each neighborhood has its own littlest girl. But of course, sometime and somewhere there must have been a littlest girl who was the least big of the lot. Well, in that sometime and at that somewhere lived Gilda. Gilda was indeed the smallest of the small, the tiniest of them all, and the farthest thing from tall. To the whole world, Gilda seemed the dearest creature that ever there could be. She was as cute as a teddy bear's button nose, and sweet like the honey of the cleverest bumblebees. All of the aunts loved to hug and kiss Gilda, to pat her head and pinch her cheeks to a cherry red. All of the uncles loved to toss little Gilda as high in the air as they could, and catch her just before she reached the floor. Her brothers, cousins, and sisters loved to play with Gilda. They would cuddle her and dress her up just like she was a doll. The family dog, Randolph Hearst, adored Gilda, and whenever he got the chance, he would lovingly lick her face for hours at a time. Yes, the world loved Gilda very much, but for Gilda the world was just too big. 8 sizes too big, to be precise. An 8 sizes too big world is a frightening place to live in, indeed. The seats of chairs sat too high from the floor to reach with her feet, too low from the table to reach with her hands. Floors spread out like wide-open fields, doors towered way up into the unknown, and way down into the unknown stairs fell away. But if the world indoors was big, the world outside was simply colossal. One day, while trying to escape a licking from Randolph Hearst, Gilda climbed up onto the couch to safety. Then, feeling adventurous, she climbed up further, up to the very top, and sat there, leaning her forehead against the pane of the front window. She looked through the window and into the yard and saw 3 gigantic trees, each one stretching effortlessly up, high enough to poke the sun in the eye with its branches and stop him from shining on the lawn. The lawn itself spread out through the darkness of the trees like a green sea to a beach of a curb. And if all this wasn't big and scary enough, just beyond that beach of a curb, varumba! Big huge cars and bigger huge trucks roared varumba back and varumba forth on an even bigger huge road. "Too big!" shrieked little Gilda. "Too big to aunties and chair seats. Too big to uncles and trees, to stairs and trucks, to tables and sisters, to cousins and lawns, to brothers and couches and Randolph Hearst. Too big!" "One day you will grow big," everyone told Gilda, and this she believed. But something had to be done in the meantime, for as you know, an 8 sizes too big world is a very frightening place to live in, indeed. Fears and wonders filled the days of all little girls, and each day Gilda wondered, "Will I be big today?" Having wondered this wonder, she would crawl to the edge of her bed and peek down to see how far it was to the floor. Then she would dangle her leg over the side to try and touch the floor. No, not yet. Today is not that one day. But just when would that one day come? Where was it now, and what was it doing? Gilda took these questions to her grandpa Ned. If anyone could help, it was him. Ned had magical powers. He could tell his right hand from his left 10 times in a row without looking. He could touch his tongue with his nose and wiggle his ears one at a time and wink with both eyes at once. But for Gilda, the best thing about her grandpa Ned had nothing to do with his magical powers. What she liked best was the way he listened carefully to her whenever she had fears or worries. He often said that fears are real, even when what you're afraid of isn't, and he never once said, "Don't be silly." So Gilda went to Grandpa Ned to complain about the size of the world. He listened, scratched himself under the chin, shuffled his fingers like a magician would with a deck of cards. When she'd finished, Ned held out his right hand with his fingers spread apart. He closed his eyes and said, "Take a finger, any finger." Gilda took one. "Pinky," guessed Grandpa Ned, and he was right. Ned curled his other fingers around Gilda's hand and led her back to the couch. "I can't solve your problem," he admitted, "but I can make your problem smaller. Size, after all, is just how you look at it." He lifted her up onto the back of the couch and then pointed out the window to a bright blue car that was parked nearby. "How big is that car?" he asked. 8 sizes too big," Gilda answered. "Perhaps it is," said Ned. "But then again, perhaps it's really very tiny. Perhaps it's small enough to fit into your pocket." Slowly and with great care, he made his left hand into a fist with a hole through it. He explained to Gilda that he had just turned his hand into a magical shrinkoscope. "If we can't make you bigger, we'll just have to make the world smaller. And since size is just how you look at it, all we really have to do is change how you look at the world." He held up his fist for Gilda to look through. "And now you can shrink anything you like down to pocket size, just by looking at it through this magical shrinkoscope here." Gilda frowned. "That's really silly," she said. "Maybe so," he countered, "but that doesn't stop it from working. And besides, there's also a magical word for it that I forgot to tell you about." With that, he turned sharply away, and far too quietly for Gilda to hear, whispered a magic word into his fist. Now, Gilda was a sensible girl. She didn't believe a word of this. But she was also a polite girl. To be fair to Grandpa Ned, she decided to at least give it a try. And when at last she did look out the window through Ned's shrinkoscope, what she saw there made her head swim, her heart skip a beat, and both her lungs gasp at once. There, in the tiny space between Ned's curled fingers, was the very same bright blue car, small enough to fit into Gilda's pocket, small enough even to get lost in her pocket. Gilda squealed with delight and went to look again, but Ned had already snapped his fingers apart. The car had returned to normal size and sat again along the curb. "There, you see, size is nothing to be afraid of," said Ned through the big cheeky grin on his face. "It's just how you look at it." Grandpa Ned had thought that Gilda would be pleased with his trick, and indeed she was. He had also thought that she would be content with just watching while he did the trick, but of course she wasn't. "Please teach me the secrets of the magical shrinkoscope," she begged. "You are far too young." "Am not. Shrinking things is far too serious a business." "Is not. Well, okay." And so Grandpa Ned taught granddaughter Gilda to curl her fingers just so, holding them firmly in place with her thumb. He taught her to say the magic word of Veruca, just so, in a convincing, magician-like sort of way. Before the lesson was through, he gave her very strict instructions. "You must put each thing that you shrink back to normal size. You may think that an 8 sizes too big world is scary, but let me tell you," he warned, "a world where size got all confused would be much more terrifying." Gilda practiced her new trick on her father's TV chair. For as long as she had known it, Gilda had never liked the TV chair. It had high and steep sides that made it very hard to climb, even from the front. The rounded armrests gave you nothing to get a good grip on. Once you had climbed up onto the seat, the danger was far from over, for hidden between the cushions at the back was a great black space, like a bottomless pit, into which Gilda might one day slip and fall and be lost forever. Goodness knew it had already swallowed up enough of her toys. But when Gilda looked at the TV chair through her new magical shrinkoscope, it didn't seem frightening at all. It looked silly, too small even for a doll to sit on. Gilda shrunk many things that day. Throughout the afternoon and throughout the house, the ringing sound of Veruca, Veruca, Veruca could be heard. She even shrunk some members of her family. From behind, of course, so they wouldn't notice. Gilda remembered Ned's instructions and returned everything back to normal size. But she didn't really want to. That night, Gilda dreamt a dream, and in her dream she imagined a world of confused size. The shoes in this world were so small that people wore one on each toe. Saucepans were so huge they were used as swimming pools, which was just as well because no one could ever collect enough soup to fill one of them. In this world of confused size, Gilda imagined that cowboys carried tiny horses like lapdogs under their arms. Instead of lampposts, gigantic toothbrushes stood in rows along the roads. Toothbrushes, as you probably know, don't give off much light, and so in the nighttime the cowboys were continually bumping into each other, apologizing and bumping into each other again, often losing their little horses in the dark. Gilda imagined many more fantastic things in her dream, and the depth of the dream kept her sleeping through the morning.